good opportunity for me to just give you a little bit of the setup of how the Justice Circles rolls out and basically the roles of all of the participants in a Justice Circle. So the idea of a circle comes from restorative practice or healing circles. And the circle process is a Native American tradition that elders or community governance in Native American culture would sit together in a circle to show equity, as you said, right? It allows us, there's no leader, there's no head, we're all equals in when we're trying to resolve our community issues, things that most impact us. But there is someone who guides the meeting or guides the circle practice or whatever you're going to be involved in. And in our pilot or in our project, we call that person the justice keeper. So you're not a teacher or the educator, but you're just the facilitator or the guide.
Do you have a scepter or something?
Yeah, you do have something like that. We don't call it scepter. That makes us a little hierarchy, but you have what we call a talking piece. And a talking piece is very symbolic to a lot of educators as that thing that allows people to focus on one person at a time speaking. So the talking piece can be designed as to however you want it to be. Being a social studies English teacher, I use a globe, a nice squishy little
Makes
globe,
sense. Yeah.
right? Youth around the age of 12, middle age, like to toss your talking piece. So something soft is always preferable. Yeah. And I guess if anybody's ever been into some type of meditative practice or things like that, talking pieces or the squishy balls help to focus you and center your thoughts. So all of these are the reasons why we use a talking piece within our circles. And as we move around to share out, we pass a talking piece along, and that indicates to the circle participants who's speaking at what time. So that's another thing. Seating matters. However, as a practitioner of restorative practice, seating doesn't always matter. Initially in your first unit, you will be doing a lot of community building. So there's 7 activities that are generated to you to build your community of justice, and kind of discuss the values and the things that you want to make sure that everybody appreciates and understands, that protects your participants and allows them to feel safe in sharing. So the circle will be a necessity to start, but as you go through the unit and the participants are very familiar with why we sit in a circle and they take your community agreements, which I'll talk about in a minute, and they're the community agreements are very instilled in them as that when we're in this circle, this is things that we share, this is a safe place. The circle won't matter as much. You'll be able to create smaller circles or paired work and things like that, because the circle really is to establish that this is the circle of respect. This is how we're going to consistently operate, communicate, and work and engage in this work together.
And on that point, if I could just jump in, my impression of what's going to happen in those circles and it being a safe space is that we all experience this world in different ways. We all interpret stuff in different ways, and this circle, as you just defined it, is a place where I will be allowed to come and express my beliefs on what the topic at hand is. Might be very different from your beliefs, but that even if it's very different from the majority's belief. This isn't a thing where the majority then is going to ridicule me. It's a place of respect and a place of, and more importantly, a place of understanding. Where we try to arrive at, oh, you know what? I don't agree with what Troy just said, but I certainly, based on his experience and his evolution, I understand how he got there. And who knows, in the process of a circle, I might come to a different reality. You know, I think the whole purpose of when we think about social justice, it's not mind control. It's not that we're trying to influence others over to our way of thinking. It's to develop greater understanding so that we can collectively solve issues that affect us all. Fair enough?
Yes, that's absolutely that's the point.
Okay, good.
That's correct. So and also in that vein, you will experience some challenges with the sharing. Initially, for young people, These are new conversations that they may not have been exposed to before. They may not be clear on what their stance is or how their feelings are. So through the design of the curriculum, I've worked in steps to scaffold us into the bigger conversation, or the more challenging part of the dialogue that we'll have with our youth participants. So as we roll out each circle meeting, we'll start with a temperature check-in. This can be brief, sometimes it can be a little longer, depending on what's going on in the world or in your community that's recently happened. You might feel that this may be the basis of the circle for the entire time that we're together, right? We are going to be embarking on in the United States, a presidential election. So you might find as we get closer to that time period, your participants may be fully engaged in wanting to talk about where this country is going and where it could be headed with whoever the potential presidential nominee will be.
And if I could say too, just like the United Nations Association, we are a bipartisan organization, and so this is not a political activity.
Not at all.
We are not looking to endorse or to judge an incumbent or a newly elected. That's not the purpose of here. The purpose of this activity is to really look at the framework of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, to look at it locally, to look at it nationally, and to look at those goals globally, and to figure out ways that we can give young people control over what's going to play out over the next 10, 20 years as they mature into young adults.
Yes. So, and in that vein as well, again, it is not, this is not a partisan, this is not my ideals or how I view the world, this is not Mandeep's ideals, it's not even the Justice Keeper's ideals. It's a guide, right? And that's where the challenge comes in. You may find that the participants' views may be very starkly different than your own. And I can just share an example. As an educator who's worked in this and just recently did a lot of work right after our 2016 election, it was a challenge for me to put aside my personal views to be able to have a conversation with my students in a real way that allowed them to express the difference in their views with one another. And I learned something as the educator. There's things that we often as adults, because we're so stuck in our own ideals and we are educated, so we feel like we come with an informed mind, that we miss certain things that are very normal ways of thinking, that kids pick up on, and usually kind of capture that in all of this complexity. They capture that little small thing but it's just this simple for me. And that's what we're trying to help the kids be able to deal with. How do we find our area of simplicity in something that is so complex?
Terry, this is a question for both of you, Terry and Mandeep. Do you have suggestions? You spoke about, I guess at the end of the day, anybody who's doing this work, you're constantly checking in with your own beliefs against perhaps a broader way of thinking, right, or a different way of thinking. You just described that for young people, but I would imagine that there's some educators who, I work for the union, right, and I say if you really embark on walking the walk and understanding the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and all that goes with it and all the measurements and indicators that are associated with those 17 goals, eventually you may come across something that doesn't agree with your faith or your race or your sex or your, something within this democracy or this global way of thinking with 193 member states. Just like the UN, you have challenges, different communities have different beliefs and all of that. Likewise with our teachers,
yes.
Right? So you two have stepped up to do this, and I would think part of that, you're aware that you're challenging yourself, and the conversations are gonna go where it goes, and as you just said, young people are gonna challenge you on some beliefs that you may have. What advice would you give a teacher, particularly one of the teachers who might be a little less familiar with this project, because the three of us have worked a lot over the past year, we know each other, but for someone who's brand new to this project, in explaining, hey, we're asking these young people to come. This is a safe space to unpack your stuff. And all of a sudden, you have little young people who are unpacking their stuff.
And they will unpack.
Yes. And then the justice circle, you got to pack it up before they leave.
Yeah.
One thing, but you're then left with that, and you're human too. You're left with this, what you just saw, the unpacking, and we're gonna call it. You just witnessed a spirited conversation, right? And at the end of the day, you're putting your papers in your bag, and you're going home thinking about your day, and you're walking with some stuff that you've seen. How do teachers refresh, reboot, come back, remain engaged, and not bring your own isms or your own ideas because to me that's not the purpose of educating. The purpose of educating is to provide information and to lead these young people to their own conclusions, even if you don't agree with them.
Yeah.
So how do you as educators kind of make yourself neutral and a vessel to really just guide those folks there?
We have to have some type of agreement, okay, how to say things, how to say it with passion, but not outright disobediently or rude. So it just was setting up some community norms that, okay, we are going to touch topics that are very touchy, and there has to be a way to express those topics without getting yourself, extra loud, just little things, keeping the community the way it is. And then as a teacher, the tough part is not jumping in. So you have to hold yourself back and realize and understand that in order to let the youth say what they have to say, you have to give them that space, and you have to give them that voice, and they also have to understand that you will not interrupt them until they are done saying their piece. And again, it takes a lot because we're so used to having control.
Navigate them
I
into the right
suffer from that too,
conversation.
yes.
So we have to let the students say what they're trying to say, but after they're done talking, you have to, maybe a few students have gone, then kind of interject just to kind of get everybody back on course, right? Because if the discussion is digressing too far,
right,
or we're missing the main point, then we do have to step in and kind of bring the discussion back, and you may bring in a few points. So I had to introduce some points where the United States did wonderful things and things we are not proud of. I said, now you are informed about these issues, right? So now make your best decision. You have to listen to both sides. So I said,
It made me think of, as you were describing the situation, escalating and knowing when to step in. You made me think about the UN. You made me think about diplomacy. Diplomacy doesn't always work, but I love the fact that it's there.
Yeah.
You could be, and to go back to your circle idea, it's a place of respect. When you respect, you're actively listening. And how do you know you're actively listening? Because you're not thinking about what you're going to say.
Yeah.
you actually, your ears are open and you're listening, right? And then you have an intelligent response based on what someone said. But you're right, it is an opportunity to teach us decorum and to teach young people, diplomats are most effective when they don't use inflammatory language.
Yeah.
Because any of us, the moment I say something to you that makes gonna make your horns come up, you stop listening, and then you miss the mark.
It also teaches them that this is the challenge that most of their elected officials,
Yes.
those delegates from the UN, these are the challenges that they face.
Yes.
When you're trying to negotiate for an entire world to function the way you envision it, but you need all of these different individual countries and people in them to operate with you. There's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of, let me see how you see it. Maybe I can align it to how I see it. I think for me as an educator, one thing to kind of get my thought out there for them is I use it as a model. I find that a lot of kids, they want to hear first of how this should go, right? And so I'll use some of even my thinking, like my struggles in my thinking, or my struggles and why I feel like these views. Like I often share with them that I'm a woman and I'm African American. I said that doesn't sound conflicting to some people, but when you live in those two existence, there are conflicts between them. Right? And so these are things that I struggle with every day to try to make sense of. Like, when is it right to be this way? Can I be both? And I think our children struggle with that too, right? That idea of who am I in the world, right? How do I make sense of if I feel like this, but I feel like this too? How does that make sense? And I think in these circles, it allows us to say that it's okay to have both. And so in the curriculum, there's a lot of opportunities where you don't have to resolve it. There doesn't have to be a resolution to how complex being a human being is.
Amen.